Greetings, everyone. My name is Scott Peterson, and we're going to be chatting everything NCAA Power Index. Let me put that up here. Everything NCAA Power Index. Oh, it was already here. Also known as NPI as it relates to Division III sports, specifically women's basketball. So let's get going. The problem and the goal. So in Division III, there's around 420 schools that participate in a variety of sports. And so for any given sport, again, we're focusing on women's basketball, but a lot of these principles can be generalized to all sports. You got to rank a whole bunch of teams up to 420. You want to do so objectively so that they're all ranked via the same criteria that is known and visible to everybody. And you want to rank them 1 to N. We don't just care about ranking, oh, you're definitely in the top 50 and you're definitely not in the top 50. We want to know that you're 178 and you're 179, the same way we want to know you're 13 and you're 14. That's a hard problem. Basketball is one of the easier sports to do this in because of the sample size. Most teams play 20 to 27 games, and that is plenty of data for NPI to work really well. On the flip side, football, which could have as few as 7 results, makes it really hard for NPI or really any ranking system to work well. But basketball, it ranks quite well because of the number of games that we have. Looking back at the previous system, a main deficiency of the previous system was it did not match up a result in the opponent. It just looked at your total aggregated winning percentage and your total aggregated strength of schedule. So 2 teams could have played very similar schedules, but if one team beat their 5 hardest teams, and the other one didn't, but they still, over the course of the season, had the same win-loss percentage, you would have a different opinion. You should have a different opinion of these teams, but you might not have had a different opinion. Some things like the regional rankings might have ended up with that first team ahead, which was definitely the point of regional rankings. But regional rankings and results versus regionally ranked opponents was an attempt to make up for this fact that the previous system did not match up result and the opponent. And the main thing looked at was winning percentage and strength of schedule in an aggregated manner. So back to NPI, the origins are a man named Tim Danahy. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. He created Pairwise. I think he was largely involved in hockey. And then he created NPI. Now, NPI really has nothing to do with Pairwise. Pairwise has a basket of criteria, and you use that criteria to compare a team to every other team, and the number of teams that it beats kind of becomes its score, and then you can rank teams based off of that. How many teams did they beat from within the pairwise criteria? Whereas NPI is not really trying to do that. You don't compare one team to every other team. You create an NCAA Power Index for each team based off of all of their results. So NPI's approach, and what can be potentially confusing, is the recursive nature of it. Recursive means that something calls into itself, and I'll explain what that is. But what NPI is trying to do is, how do we assign a value to every result? Well, on game 1 of the season, when Team A beats Team B, we know that Team A won. They should get more value from this result than Team B, who lost. But we don't know how good either team is. And we want to know how good each team is, because if Team B is really good and Team A beat them, they should get more value than if Team B is really bad. But we don't know that yet. And so what NPI does is it says, hey, it doesn't really matter what we assign as each team's strength right off the bat. So we can kind of pick any number. We could pick 0, we could pick 50, we could pick something else. But then we're going to calculate NPI for every game throughout the season and for every team. And then when we're done, we can average it all per team and get their overall NPI, as I call it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to act like we're starting the season over again, but we're going to use the same results because we know the results that happened. And we're just going to use those ending NPIs from the first time we did this. We're going to use that as each team's strength. So now we have an idea of the strength of Team A and Team B. But we're not going to just do this a second time. We're going to do this a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time, which is the recursive nature. We're taking the output of the first run and running it through a second time, where the only thing that's changing is each team's NPI. All the results are the same because the results have happened. And the math kind of works out in a really interesting way, where if you do this enough times, kind of between 60 and 85 times, everyone's NPI stops changing. It kind of reaches an equilibrium. And so that's kind of the point of doing this recursively, is we just keep doing this until the numbers stop changing and we arrive at a really, secure, a really strong NPI value for each team. And we do this specifically because we're admitting we don't know the strength of each team when we start. But over the course of all the games, we will get a very good idea of the strength of each team. Now, you could say the strength of a team on day one is very different from the last day of the season. That's true. NPI does not have any time aspect to it. It does not attempt to create NPI values for teams throughout the year and use that as the opponent value for games in that part of the year. It just uses it for every game across the season. There are definitely pros and cons to that, but that's what NPI does. So now we're going to get down to the formula. The main thing we're going to start with is the result component. So in women's basketball, the weight of the result, a win or a loss, is 20%, and the weight of strength of schedule, or this is your opponent's NPI, is 80%. Now let's pause there. A lot of people want to look at this and say, why is the strength of your opponent 4 times as important or valuable as whether or not you beat them? Don't we want whether or not you beat them to be like most of it? Like, shouldn't it be flipped or more? Like, isn't that the point of this? We're playing a game to win, and if you won, that should be worth tons. Well, let's take a step back and say, how do we want... what's a good way to say this? A key thing when deciding how these play off of each other to arrive at the weights that you want is actually not necessarily how important you think these are relative to each other. It's the distribution of the underlying data. And this gets really confusing and unintuitive because, roughly speaking, the average winning percentage is 50% because, well, not roughly speaking for that, it is 50% because in every game you have a winner or a loser. For strength of schedule, it's also very close to 50%, which makes us think that they're pretty similar. It's kind of the same units, right? It's percentage, so it's between 0 and 1. The average is the same, or very, very close. So they seem to be really, really similar. Well, we're going to go check something. We're going to look at last year's NPI. Nope, not NPI data, NCAA data. So we've got we got win percentage in E. So we're going to say, what was the standard deviation? So one standard deviation from the mean is an indication of how spread out or not spread out is my data. And sure, we'll do the average. So the average winning percentage actually is 0.488, and that's because teams play different numbers of games, and we're averaging winning percentages. So even if the total win-loss for the entirety of Division III is 50%, the average of the individual team's winning percentages is not 50%, but it's 488. And then one standard deviation away from the mean is 0.242. So let's do the same thing for strength of schedule. So your average strength of schedule is 509, and your average, and your one standard deviation from the mean of strength of schedule is 0.048. So it's way smaller than winning percentage. And this makes sense, right? You have some teams that win no games and have a 0 winning percentage. Some teams win all of them and they have a 1 winning percentage. Well, when you look at SOS, your largest SOS is 654, and your lowest is 339. Those numbers are very far from 1 and from 0. So SOS is just way more compacted. And so if you want to actually capture the strength of your opponent, it has to be weighted way more to make up for the fact that its distribution is way more clumped together. So if you wanted the same change in winning percentage to be treated equally to the same change in strength of schedule for women's basketball, you would, instead of a 20% weight, you would need about a 15% weight. And for strength of schedule, you would need an 85% weight instead of 80% weight. If you want the same movement in winning percentage and SOS to be valued the same. I think that's the key point here, is these two statistics have way different distributions. You could come up with something really, really dumb to try to highlight my problem. What would be something really, really dumb? I'm not coming up with something good. I mean, you could say like the square footage of residence is one criteria, and height in feet of resident. Well, it would be dumb to say, well, I want them weighted the same, so I'm going to give them each 50% weight. Well, if you want them weighted the same, you have to know both what is the average square footage of a residence and what is the distribution? How much does it change? And you would have to know the same thing for the height of the feet in resident. And if you wanted the same sort of change for each to be treated the same, you would need the height in feet of resident to be weighted way, way more than the square footage of the residence. And this is obviously very intuitive because you're like, oh, that's way larger than this. It's less intuitive here since they're both between 0 and 1 and roughly centered on 50%, 0.5000. But that's why I think 20 and 80 is great. You could do 15 and 85, but I do think that something like 2080 or even 2575 is good because I think we do want a win to be worth more than the strength of the opponent that you're facing. We just don't want it to completely, like, if it was 80-20, it wouldn't matter who you played. It would just matter how many wins you had. We would just be sorting teams by wins, and it doesn't matter if one team beat a bunch of top 50 teams and the other team beat a bunch of teams in the 350s. It really wouldn't matter. All right, so we're back on the result component. Let's get rid of this. So that means if a team wins, they get 20 points. And that's that 20% of 100. They get 20 points if they win. This is this 20% right here. Result times the result weight. And if they lose, they get 0. So you don't get negative points if you lose. You just don't get this 20 points. That's the result component of the NPI formula. Second component, opponent strength. All this is your opponent's NPI times the weight of that component, which is 80%. So you can see this part is going to be the same. I can change this to a loss. This 0 changed from 20, but this part didn't change because who you played didn't change. This is merely the strength of your opponent. It has nothing to do with the result, but this part does. I think that's pretty clear. So then we get to the quality win bonus. It's very well named. It says, hey, we want to give you extra credit if you beat good teams. And so the way that we do that, it's probably easier to look here, is we have a quality win bonus threshold. For women's basketball, it's 54. So we can see opponent NPIs. Let's actually go to last year. NPI value 54 is right between teams 111 and 112. So if you beat a team 111th in NPI or better, you got a quality win bonus. But it's not just a static value, right? Because team 111 is drastically different than team number 1. So the way that we do it is you take the opponent's NPI and you subtract the quality win bonus threshold, and then you multiply that difference by the quality win bonus multiplier, which is 2/3. And so if you beat Penn State Barron last year, you got 54.029 minus 54, which is 0.029, times 0.66666. Be a really small number, but you still get a bonus because they are above 54. And with every team higher than that you beat, you get more quality win bonus because that team's NPI value is higher. I think it's designed very well. And then if a team is below 54, you can see already that this would become a negative number, right? If this is below 54, this is always 54. If this ends up being a negative number, we just throw it away. So you don't lose points for beating a team whose NPI is below the quality win bonus threshold. You're just not eligible for the bonus. One thing that I would love to see is this multiplier being a lot higher than 0.66666. I think you should get a lot more value for beating a top team. So we're looking at Hope women's basketball, their schedule for the upcoming year. Who's the best team? This opponent NPI is based off of my projected preseason rankings. So these will be wildly different when we get into the year. But like Illinois Wesleyan, you can see if Hope were to beat Illinois Wesleyan, and Illinois Wesleyan were ranked 16th in NPI with a 61.38 opponent NPI, Hope would get 74.03 for that win. If they beat the 32nd ranked team, they would get 70.86. And the difference in quality win bonus is about 1.5. I think it's way harder to beat the 16th team than the 32nd team, and I would want the bonus to be a lot larger of a difference than 1.5. Even something like, instead of 2/3, something like 2.5 as a multiplier is just going to increase the better a team that you beat. And I think that should be the case. But anyway, it's not the case right now. Teams do get a quality win bonus. So we reset this all. That's the quality win bonus. So we're at 1, 2. Those are really the only 3 components. You have the result component, which is either 0 or 20 for women's basketball. The SOS component, which is your opponent's NPI times 80%, and that's the same for every game. And then the quality win bonus, which is either going to be 0 if you lost the game or if the team's NPI is below 54. If it's above 54, We do a little math. They get a low quality win bonus. And then you just add these 3 up and you get their game NPI. So that's pretty simple. But then NPI does some other stuff. It says, we know that across Division 3, teams play quite different distributions of a schedule. So what would be some good examples? Let's look at schedules for this upcoming year. Let's look at some strong teams. So let's look at Nazareth. So Nazareth has 7 teams on their schedule who are 300 or worse in my preseason rankings. And Mary Hardin Baylor has 1 game against team 300 or worse. I would bet you that most of these Nazareth opponents are from their own conference, so they don't have the option to not play them. So what MPI does is it says, hey, if you have enough wins, we don't really care about your worst wins. And so it has something called a minimum wins threshold, which is not named great. It seems like, oh, I have to get to this minimum wins threshold to be eligible for the NCAA tournament or something like that. But that's not what it is. It says, hey, once you get to this minimum wins threshold, if you win additional games, you might be able to not have them count. And what that looks like is, let's take Hope here. I have this win rank column. And so for Hope, what this means, in this current schedule, they go undefeated. Once you get to 15 wins, actually this one should be false because we only need 15. If the game NPI you get from your 16th best win would bring down your overall NPI, we don't count it. So Hope's best 15 wins, 66.33. So they don't have to count any win below that because you can see all these values would bring that 66 average down. So MPI is like, hey, you don't have to count these. You've given us enough data that shows how strong you are. We don't care about these now. So let's see how we can change this. Let's say Hope did not win these 2 tough games. They lost both of those. Well, now they're not wins. So they don't count towards the minimum wins threshold. We go down to 15, which again does not include you. So it'll include these. We have to average now. This average includes the average in your losses. You can see 49, 47. These are a lot lower. So we're at 62.74. That's still higher than 59.96. And so we're not going to count that one either. Let's lose 2 more games. Well, we got to do 15 again. So see, my win rank is just because it's the same team here. It's saying these are of equal win rank, but we only need to count one of them to get to your best 15. So we're going to do this average now. We got to count all the losses. We got to count your best 15 wins. We're at 60.01. So hope you don't have to count these bottom ones. But you can see, like, once you get down to the bottom of your schedule, these Adrian I have at 213, Kalamazoo 241, and then St. Mary's jumps all the way down to 299. So Hope is now At 4 losses, they're flirting with having to count a 299 opponent versus a 241, and that's a big deal. So let's say they lose 2 more games. Your best 15 wins is now here. Your average NPI, all your losses, your best 15 wins is 57.69. Still don't have to count these at the bottom. But your NPI really starts dropping with each loss that you add. If it then also needs to bring in a team whose NPI is a lot lower than your previous worst. What else to say on this? I think we'll get to some fallacies later. So again, to recap, for NPI, we've got the result portion, we've got the strength of schedule portion, the quality win bonus portion, and then we just talked about the minimum wins threshold, how only if a win would bring down your NPI does a team get to not count it. There are also scenarios where a team doesn't count all their losses, but it's really a scenario like this. So you can see if a team has all these losses, if we count their worst one, their overall NPI is 34.29. If we count their worst 2, their overall NPI is 35.54. It just went up when they lost another game. And NPI is like, hey, we don't want your NPI to ever go up because you lost a game. And so if a loss would increase your NPI, we also drop it. So for a winless team, their overall NPI will be the result of one game, their worst loss. Now, let's say they win one game. Well, now their average is 45.54. So this one would bring it down. This one would bring it down. And like you keep adding in games. And so probably actually all of these would be added. Their averages, well, not quite all of them. 40 point. Yeah, so right about here is where this team would be. And if you win any more, we just end up having to count a lot more. So we're looking now, we go from the bottom to where your running average is 43.30. So it'd be somewhere in here. So teams think, well, no, we'll get to that in the fallacy. Result, opponent strength, SOS. Quality win bonus, minimum wins threshold. We're talking about dropping wins and losses. So now let's talk about the fallacies. One of the fallacies is just get wins. So let's look at here. I need to know who team. My lookup is not off of the rank, it's off of the team. All right. I don't need to unnecessarily call out this team, but my current lowest ranked team is Leslie, and my top team is Gettysburg. Actually, it is off of the rank, so we don't need to talk about teams. So let's say I lose to the best team and I beat the worst team. This is actually a bad example. Because you would get actually more points from losing to the best team than beating the worst team. probably because of the 2080 weight in women's basketball. Let's find a break-even point. All right, team 8 and team 375. So if I lose to team 8, I get fewer points than if I beat team 375. So I'm like, oh, why would I ever schedule team 8? Why don't I just schedule all team 375s, go like 24-1, and if I need a pool C bid, I get a pool C bid. Sounds great in theory, but let's pull up last year's. Our last Pool C team was lacrosse. You can see their average NPI value was 57.82. 57.82. That's lower than 52.3. So this is really not a comparison a team is ever making. Like, sure, if these were your only options, is schedule team 8 or schedule team 375, you still actually wouldn't want to just play team 375 because you really are going to get an overall NPI around 52, 53, and that's going to be far away from getting a Pool C bid. So if that's your goal, is to get a Pool C bid, you don't want to do this. You need to be beating. So if you just beat team roughly 275 a bunch of times in a season, you would have an NPI that would get you a Pool C bid. But even this is not terribly meaningful because if you need a Pool C bid, you've lost at least once. And a loss, unless it's against an elite team like this, is going to have an NPI below this. So remember that 57.820. That's what we're going for. We don't care about these teams here. Actually, looks like we do. Oh, I see. We don't. So let's say you played team 75 5 times and team 275 20 times. And you lost every game to that good team, and you beat one every game against the bad team. Your NPI would be 55.16. You didn't get a Pool C bid. So knowing that you're going to have some losses, you're like, okay, what's the minimum quality team that I have to beat a bunch of times to get to 57.82? It's not even team 200. Let's try team 190. Nope. Team 175? Nope. Team 160? There we go. So if I lose 5 times to team 75 and beat team 160 20 times, I'll have the type of resume that would get me a Pool C bid. But you can see, like, with every additional loss, oops. Oh, we're way below the 57.82 now. So do we have to beat team 150? Oh, nope. Team 140? Not even that. Team 135? There we go. So 6 losses against team 75. Now I've got that kind of the average rest of teams that I have to beat is team 135. This starts to give you a feel for, like, you can't just get wins. It doesn't matter that beating a relatively bad team, was it team 375, got you more points than losing to the number 8 team. That's not really all that we care about. We don't care about maximizing points in one result. We care about, over the course of 25 to 27 games, do I get my NPI into a level that is meaningful to me, either Pool C or high enough to host opening round, high enough to host a sectional round. Another fallacy is that dropping losses can be exploited. And the quick way to say this is any team in the running for a Pool C bid or better will have 0 dropped losses. every single loss will hurt their NPI. And so there's really no way to exploit this because, I mean, you can exploit this if you're team 300. Sure, if you're team 300, your NPI is going to be at a level where if you play any team in the top, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, and lose to them, it would likely help your NPI, and so it'll just get dropped. But do we care about that? Like, I don't think we care about that. We don't care about that way that team 300, that a very bad team can exploit the system. We just don't care about it. And I guess going back to just get wins, that can kind of be exploited. Let's say you're a really bad team. So main team, I'm team 375. So it could be that if team 375 plays team 300, and loses every game, their NPI is going to be 3699. So let's say instead of doing that, let's hide this. We can always see this running NPI. Let's say they always played team 390 and they win every game. Actually, no. Let's say they lose 3 of them. Their NPI is way higher. What was it, 3669 before? It's 4891. So really, like, if you're a bad team, the difference between like losing a bunch of games to a team a little bit better than you versus beating a bunch of teams that are a little bit worse than you is a massive change in your NPI. So like 36.69 compared to 4881. Let's look last year. 3669 would have been 404th, and 48.91 would be right 239th, 240th. So like a huge possible change for a really bad team just by changing how you schedule. So this is why if you're a top team in a conference, you want all your worst teams in the conference, like your team 375s, you want them booking really bad teams and winning. You don't want them booking slightly better teams and losing. I gave them a couple wins in this scenario. Their NPI is going to be way lower. But again, we don't really, like, in both scenarios, the quality of Team 375 didn't change, but just because of who they scheduled, their NPI changed about 160 spots. And so I think one place where NPI actually doesn't do a very good job of capturing team quality is in the bottom 200 spots. I don't think it does a very good job. The impact of it not doing a very good job in those spots, I think, is pretty small. Because generally teams don't have the opportunity to change their schedule this wildly. And so I think because teams are not doing that, it's actually way better. But it could be that, like, looking at last year, Pitt Bradford, actually, let's try to see who could have benefited the most. So a really bad team, but who played a strong, like, take Wilk, Eastern University. Where were they in NPI? They were 370th. We can see from their NCAA SOS, they had pretty good opponents, and they won, is that 1 game, 2 games? So it could be that if Eastern University just booked a few easier games, actually, we can find out for sure. Sorry for the small font. Let's move this up. Eastern University, so we can see all their losses. Let's look for... These are all non-conference, okay. So it could be that instead of playing Susquehanna, Franklin and Marshall, Muhlenberg, McDaniel, and Ursinus in non-conference and losing to them all, if they had just played teams like North Central Minnesota, Fontbonne, Alverno, Illinois Tech, Concordia, Chicago. I realized that that's Edgewood. So 1 win for Eastern. If they had played more teams like St. Elizabeth and got a couple wins, that they would not have been 370th in MPI. They would have been 310th, 290th, something way, way, way higher. I don't know if Eastern had that opportunity to schedule differently. Sure, there's a theoretical world in which a lot of teams do this, but then the system will continue to sort itself out, because if all of your teams, let's say 325 and below, so that's 110 teams, if all of them, 100 teams, if they're all just booking each other instead of better teams and losing to them, if they're all booking each other, well, someone has to win and someone has to lose those games. And so again, your worst teams are probably going to get sorted to the bottom. And so the system kind of sorts itself out. It can be manipulated or exploited by some teams in the short run, but at the instant that anyone starts copying it, it really just starts sorting itself out. So that is dropping wins can be exploited. All right, and then let's look at, I've definitely heard this said, and I think both are just a misunderstanding or not looking deeply enough into it. Just get wins. Yes, the argument is true that beating a really bad team is worth more than losing to a pretty good team. But that doesn't help you get a Pool C bid. That just helps you maximize your MPI, which is a thing for bad teams, but isn't really useful for top teams. Dropping losses can be exploited. Again, yes, it can be for bad teams. It really can't be for good teams, because I think the top ranked NPI team to drop a loss last year was like 130th in NPI. So the last fallacy, I don't know if I've heard something very, very direct about this, but I think people did comment on how many bids, especially the NESCAC and the WIAC, but I think the UAA can be involved in that. How many at-large bids and how many teams in the NCAA tournament these conferences got as a potential indictment of MPI. And I don't get that. Let's pull up our teams here. Is that right? Okay. So we're going to break down conference and bids. So we can see that, what do we have? 21 Pool C, WIAC plus NESCAC got 8, right? Because they each got one automatic. So 8 of 21 Pool C's were from WIAC and NESCAC. Is that good? Is that bad? I think that is good, because I think that they were the better basketball teams with the better results. It is bad. The scenario in which it's bad is if it affects the D3 competitive landscape such that we lose schools and the division gets smaller. Because it could be, I'm in the Northwest Conference, I am in the Southern California Conference, I'm in the SLIAC, and I see like almost no path to getting Pool C bids anymore for a variety of reasons, and slowly schools leave those conferences to go to a non-D3 level. That would be a bad outcome. But I think that the system is working well in that these teams were really, really strong. What's a good way to illustrate how strong they were? So let's take let's take a bunch of teams here. Team NPI rank. Bid. We know that the C's went down through lacrosse. We can see average MPI of wins. B2. And then let's do average MPI of losses. And it's actually not of that because losses is in AA, not ZZ. So in general, you can see these last teams in, not only were they beating better teams, they were losing to better teams as well than all of these teams. We can pull in NCAA strength of schedule if we want to look at that. And let me try to find a fun stat. Because sometimes I think these average MPI numbers are just really hard to visualize. Average rank. Did I do this right? I think I did. So this is trying to show the rank so 64.99 doesn't feel a whole lot different than, say, 60.89. But like the average team that they were beating, actually, that's wrong. Average opponent NPI in wins, because we don't want the win. We don't want the win MPI that includes the 20 and includes the quality win bonus. We want to know the quality of the opponent. So like these, who are the last 5 in these 5 teams, which includes, look at that, 2 WIAC, 3 NESCAC. So they're absolutely the teams in question here. They were beating on average Team 88, 104, 105, 122, 162. And you can see the types of teams they were beating. So we have one potential crossover right here. Let's do the same here. Average opponent MPI in losses. This was WW, right? And then we'll do the same rank off of G. Average rank will come. So you can see, actually, Stevens Point and Wash U were extremely, extremely close. And actually, I bet you the difference here was that Stevens Point just had a couple more games. UA does not have a tournament, and so it could be that a 1-1 from Wash U and those two would have been enough to get them in. I don't know what their 15th best win looked like, but that can definitely be a factor there. I don't think we would have. There's basically nothing separating these teams. But if you look into the rest, for the most part, the teams that didn't get in were beating far worse teams and losing to far worse teams than this batch of teams that got in. And I think, like, we can pull in, let's look at NCAA win percentage, which I think is in 5. So you can see, some of these teams are going to have better winning percentages. And the MPI just is way better at saying, okay, you beat way worse teams than, say, Stevens Point. On average, 90 spots of ranking worse were the teams that you beat. And you lost to worse teams, but you just lost a lot less, which I think this is about 3 games less. Is that worth it to make up for this? And NPI says no, and I would say no. I think I want the team that's beating Team 162 on average and versus 253 on average and losing to 29 on average versus 83 on average, even if the distribution of this team's schedule means that they had more of these losses than this team had of these losses. Because looking at the numbers, I feel pretty confident that if St. Norbert faced Stevens Point schedule, they would have less than a 692 winning percentage. And that's what MPI is trying to do. It's trying to say, hey, we don't care about your worst wins. We just care about your best wins. We are going to count every loss, and we want to look specifically at the strength and weakness of all of your counting wins and your losses. And I think in the old system, because we were humans looking at these aggregated numbers, we're like, well, we want winning percentage to be important. This is kind of a large difference, 120. Unless St. Norbert had just a trash strength of schedule, they were usually going to get in. And even over, like, La Crosse had a 593 winning percentage. Tufts had a 600. And we were like, oh, 593 is 220 points worse than St. Norbert. There's absolutely no way that they can be a better team. Or more deserving, I guess, would be a different way of saying it. I don't know that people were necessarily saying that this profile was a better team. They were saying it was more deserving. And MPI says, hey, I'm going to look at every single game result. And if you are over your 15 counting wins, beating on average Team 104 versus Team 253, that is worth a whole lot in my book, especially with some quality win bonus thrown in. So I think that's it. We talked about the problem and the goal, ranking a whole bunch of teams objectively 1 to N, the main deficiency of the previous system, NPI's origins. So NPI, the P is power. NPI has nothing to do with pairwise other than it was the same creator that created pairwise that created NPI. I think both are strong systems for what they're trying to do, but NPI is not pairwise in any way, shape, or form. NPI's approach is assigning a value to every result. And it says we don't know the strength of a team right off the bat. And we're going to use all of the results to inform us about the strength of each team and then go back and update and do that over and over again. NPI formula, we got the result, we got the opponent strength component, quality win bonus, and then the way that this minimum wins threshold acts within it. Dropping wins and losses in context of that minimum wins threshold and these two fallacies, just get wins and dropping losses, can be exploited. We saw how these are true, but they're really true among bad teams, and we care a lot less that they're true among bad teams. They're not true among good teams, which is where this really matters. And then I hope I've convinced you that these were just the better teams that got in. And when you look at their strength of schedule, we just have such a hard time we want 3. We just have such a hard time knowing, like, what does 600 mean? And you can see, like, these teams had basically the same strength of schedule and the same winning percentage, but how they got there was a lot different. Johns Hopkins in general lost to the best teams on their schedule. So they had a worse average team that they beat, but a better team that they lost to. And NPI is just going to count this less because it's like, you did lose to these teams. Whereas in the old system, these teams would be neck and neck, and potentially with Johns Hopkins above, depending on what their VRO record looked like. But NPI clearly has had Oshkosh 4 spots ahead. And so, again, this is the aggregated strength of schedule, aggregated winning percentage. And MPI is like, hey, we can split these out. I can give you a lot more credit for wins because you get that 20 points and you are eligible for quality win bonus, and split it out from the losses. And so losing to a good team, sure, like it's worth more than losing to a bad team. But we get to split them out. And that's a key part of NPI. And that's it. So, in conclusion, well, there's no conclusion. I'm happy to make follow-up videos if people have questions. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Comment your questions. There's lots of good content out there on NPI. I'm hoping to just add my voice here. I've got a different audience and might have a different way of explaining it that really resonates with some people. I think that this is, especially in basketball, an incredible improvement upon the last system, and it creates some really good incentives. There are definitely some cons around scheduling that I might get to in a future video. But again, like, subscribe, and comment any questions. And thanks for watching, everybody.